Skywatch Media News for March the 19th, 2020. In today's society, there are many threats sweeping the globe that must be addressed because they involve our safety and security. One of the big concerns lies within the Cascadia Fault Zone, where seismic activity is indicative of something major taking place. Now, we don't know when this threat will hit, but when it does, we need to be ready. Imagine, if you may, what must have been in the minds of coastal residents some 320 years ago, late in the evening of January the 26th in the year 1700, when residents who had settled into bed for the evening were suddenly awakened when the ground began to shake. As the primary waves suddenly arrived, the ground began to compress and expand, and dogs began to nervously bark. But the first wave was more subtle because of its quick movement. But then, as the secondary wave arrived, the earthquake became more unmistakable. The shaking had become much stronger across the villages. The entire fault along the Cascadia Subduction zone between Northern California and Vancouver Island ruptured, generating immense seismic waves as the fault unleashed its fury for 3 to 6 excruciating minutes. A significant portion of the rupture occurred on the shallowest portion of the fault, and it uplifted the seafloor and the entire column of water above it. This great column of water then collapsed, producing a series of tsunami waves that would batter the coastline through the night and across the Pacific Basin. Although people west of the Cascades found themselves to be in a precarious situation by the violent shaking, it was the wall of water that caused the brunt of the calamity that evening, when villages were overtaken by tsunami-generated floods. If you can picture what took place back in the year 1700 along the Washington coast, then you may get a better understanding of what a Cascadia megathrust could do along the Pacific Northwest and what the odds of a repeat may be. In the decades of the 1980s, scientists discovered significant evidence of immense earthquakes in the Cascadia region. Researchers from Caltech University published a paper that asserts that the Cascadia region is actively deforming, which portends that the zone is likely to produce a tremendous earthquake. Another finding published in 1987 provided the geologic evidence to support Caltech's findings regarding land level deformation along the coast and evidence of widespread tsunami inundation following these great earthquakes of the past. These scientists continued to work out the details of the earthquake of 1700, including magnitude, shaking levels, tsunami inundation, and the frequency of earthquakes in the region of the past 10,000 years. These results had indicated that submarine landslide deposits along the Cascadia margin had a reoccurrence rate of about 500 years. In some instances, especially along the Oregon coast, the reoccurrence rate was much less. Their analysis was so precise that the study of earthquakes in other subduction zones around the world provide the exact date of the earthquake of 1700. They knew that it happened at around 9 p.m. local time on January the 26th, based on written records of the orphan tsunami of 1700 in Japan. Because there hasn't been any evidence of another tsunami in the Cascadia region since the year 1700, this means that the fault has been building up pressure for the past 320 years, which must eventually be unleashed. Now, I am not in the earthquake prediction business, and neither should you. but the odds of another big one in this region in the next 50 years range from about 1 in 3 for a magnitude 8 in southern Oregon to about 1 in 8 for a magnitude 9, which would span the entire subduction zone. There are other subduction earthquakes in the past 20 years that can be utilized for study purposes. The most serious of these earthquakes include the magnitude 9.1 Sumatra earthquake and Indian Ocean tsunami of the year 2004, which severely affected 16 nations. Other great quakes to consider would be the magnitude 8.8 earthquake in Chile in the year 2010, and the 9.1 magnitude earthquake and subsequent tsunami that occurred in Japan in the year 2011. One of the biggest consequences of the Japanese disaster was the nuclear meltdown of the Fukushima power plant, which even to this day is conducting a desperate attempt to contain radioactive and chemical pollution and to remove spent fuel rods. The cost of their futile efforts has been in the hundreds of billions of dollars. There are many lessons that we can learn from these great earthquakes around the world, as well as some surprises that will emerge with each reoccurrence. But despite the various earthquake effects, there are several conclusions that can be made regarding the Cascadia subduction zone, as well as various expectations in a region that is locked, loaded, and ready for action. Here are some things that we need to consider. First off, the emergency response will be slow, especially in coastal and rural areas, simply because of ground and structural damage, along with tsunami flooding. Everyone needs to become self-sufficient with respect to food, water, and medicine, and this would be for weeks, not just for days. Prior to our current situation, most family households had less than 3 days' worth of emergency supplies on hand. So being prepared is essential regardless of the situation. Because there is a lack of tsunami-safe evacuation options along coastal areas where residents and visitors are present, there must be an effort to greatly improve the ability to educate the public on evacuation procedures. In order for a successful recovery to occur, it is essential for water, power, fuel, and transportation systems to be functioning properly. When critical lifelines are disrupted, the ability of your hospitals and first responders to act accordingly will be severely hampered. Finally, community planning initiatives must be implemented in order to establish vertical evacuation alternatives. Otherwise, we are running around like Chicken Little, with absolutely no idea of what to do next. In 2019, FEMA and the Pacific Northwest Seismic Network stepped in to establish certain procedures for vertical evacuation. One of the goals was to double the number of seismic instruments in the region, in conjunction with early warning systems that went live back in April of 2017. The expectation is that this shake alert would provide people in coastal communities with up to a few minutes of advance warning, depending on their actual closeness to the epicenter of the quake. Public wireless emergency alerts and cell phone applications are also in development for residents of Washington and Oregon. These warning systems will help people to get to a safe place where they can hopefully ride out the earthquake. Right now, they are developing a series of symposiums on earthquake resilience and ways to bounce back from a horrendous disaster. There are presently thousands of unreinforced masonry and concrete structures located in cities such as Seattle, Tacoma, and Portland, and many more are likely to suffer significant damage during the next Cascadia earthquake. In addition, there are hundreds of schools that do not meet the engineering requirements for safety. Unfortunately, more investment is needed from both state and local resources in order to meet the minimum safety requirements. At this moment, such an undertaking may have to be placed on the back burner, considering the more important priorities not only facing these particular states, but the nation as a whole. Even so, there are a few projects that could be underway before the end of this decade that would greatly improve this region's ability to recover from an earthquake disaster. What is important at this particular time is the ability to provide for future generations the tools of preparedness, not just for the Pacific Northwest, but for all regions of the U.S. and beyond. In times of darkness, it is essential that we work as one team for the benefit of all. This requires great sacrifice from each and every person, from the privileged to the least of us. We are all in this together, for it is the desire and the willingness to help one another in times of despair that will lift our spirits and lead us out of the darkness and into the light. Thanks for watching.